बोलिए सतगुरु महाराज की जय, सच्चे दरबार की जय. Today we present weekly satsang from Akhand Gyan from the monthly magazine of Divya Jyoti Jagrati Sansthan and is inspired by His Holiness Sri Ashutosh Maharaj. This article is from June 2010 entitled The Nightingale and the Rose. In our lives, we tend to pacify the expectations of others by virtue of sympathy or deep love because as humans we believe in and value relationships, but in doing so, we often commit the major fault of making irrational expectations from others that invariably go beyond measure. We all must have heard of a very common poem called The Nightingale and the Rose by poet Oscar Wilde. Now an excerpt is concisely presented here. A nightingale overhears a student mourning over the fact that the daughter of his professor will not dance with him since he is not able to gift her red rose. The nightingale is deeply touched by the student's sorrow. In her attempts to make several trials and offers, she visits all the trees bearing roses in the garden, but all in vain. In the end, one of the trees with white roses reveals that there's indeed a way to generate a red rose. If you want a red rose, says the tree, you must sing to me all night long and then pierce your heart against a thorn. Seeing the student's melancholy, the nightingale happily agrees to give up her life for the sake of the true love the boy cherishes for the girl. She pierces her heart against a thorn so that her heart's blood, the white rose, could be stained. As soon as the rose blossoms into a marvelous red, the nightingale dies. In the early morning, the student finds a rose in his garden. Greatly delighted, he runs up to the professor's house with the rose in his hand. But alas, the girl again rejects his plea because another man brought her real jewels, which in her eyes are far more meaningful than a mere flower. The student furiously throws the rose into a roadside gutter, returns back to his room for the studies, and ultimately decides not to believe in true love anymore. Now in this excerpt, Oscar Wilde throws light upon the futility of one's attempt in satisfying humans and falling in love with them. In fact, there's no quantifying limit for man's desires and expectations, as they are ever evolving and changing with time. We saw that the nightingale flew from one tree to another in order to satisfy the boy's desire. In her endeavour to fulfill the boy's craving to achieve his love, the nightingale relinquished her life. But her sacrifice went in vain, since the very purpose for which she gave her life could not be met, and so everything turned out to be an utter failure. Here is another example that can be cited in the same context. It once happened that a father promised his son to buy him a high-speed bike if he passed his exams with distinction, knowing that his son was crazy for bikes. Thus, the son studied for his examinations thoroughly, and scoring well, he got that kind of bike he sought for. But who knew that the same bike would prove to be the medium for his death? One night, after boozing heavily with his friends, he rode his bike on the highway to never return again. So, let us all be careful and think before we leap to satisfy ourselves and others by attempting to fulfill our and their material expectations. Maybe a large chunk of those expectations and desires turn out to be irrational, as their outcome could be unknowingly fatal to us. However, having said this, we do not intend to convey that one should project himself as an unkind person and turn down any opportunity to satisfy others. For example, if parents expect that their child should perform well in exams, then it's not an irrational expectation. Every son and daughter should try to stand up to such expectations of their parents, and the parents too should meet all indispensable requirements of their children that would be good for their mental and intellectual growth. Now, let us see if God expects anything from us, and should we try to please God? If a gardener plants some rose saplings in the garden, then what would he expect from them? Beautiful blossoming roses, of course. Likewise, God made us human beings and sent us on this earth with one primary motive, which is to realize Him and resort to our eternal abode, which is His kingdom, as is elaborated by all our holy scriptures. It is for this purpose only that this precious gift of this human garb has been bestowed upon us by him. However, here the question is, are we trying to live up to this rational expectation of God? The answer would be no in the case of 99% of us. This is why we experience so many woes and miseries in our lives. Delusions captivate us because of our ignorance and endless desires. Controlling the mind is the most important human test, and the strategy for it is to allow our mind to be absorbed in purity and wisdom. Sanctified thoughts thus generated would serve as a sure-shot remedy to eradicate the root cause of delusion itself, due to which a being gets distracted by unwise worldly cravings. But who will provide the direction for us to be guided on this strategy? The answer is the one and only, the perfect master, under whose guidance we will become self-sufficient after realizing the divine abode within. This strategy, once attained and practiced, awakens the power of discrimination, which is the ability to distinguish between genuine needs and demands and irrational expectations. When the perfect master initiates us into divine knowledge, Akhand Gyan, then we realize our real self. This governs our judgment regarding our decision to gratify others, thus helping us direct our efforts in the right direction. The mandatory step is to develop wisdom through spiritual progress and use it to dispense decisions which would be harmful to no one. Certainly, with this approach, the results are bound to be in the welfare of one and all. To read more such articles, please subscribe to our monthly magazine Akhand Gyan, available in 3 languages, Hindi, English and Punjabi. You can subscribe to the magazine by clicking on the link mentioned in the description.